The aroma of roasted turkey should have meant comfort, but as Margaret Holloway stood in the corner of her son's opulent dining room, wearing the same cardigan she'd owned for over a decade, she realized she didn't belong there. Laughter roared, wine flowed, and strangers filled the seats she once prepared every Thanksgiving. Her homemade pie sat untouched, overshadowed by Peyton's fancy catering. Then came the final blow. Her son Colton dropped a foil-wrapped plate of leftovers into her lap and sneered, "This is all you deserve." The room fell silent. No one defended her. Not even him. At that moment, Margaret saw 15 years of quiet sacrifices, silent bank transfers, and swallowed pride burn into ash, but she wouldn't crumble. Not this time. That night, something inside her broke, and something far stronger began to rise. The morning sun crept gently through the gauzy curtains of Margaret Holloway's kitchen, casting golden lines across the butcher block countertop she'd refinished herself last spring. Savannah, in late October, still clung to summer's warmth, and as she stood barefoot on the cool tile floor, pouring her second cup of coffee, Margaret allowed herself the indulgence of quiet. She was 62 now, retired for nearly a decade after 35 years as a senior auditor for one of the South's biggest corporate tax firms. Margaret had earned her peace. Her days were slower, filled with community volunteer work, gardening, and the occasional client consultation for women navigating financial independence after divorce or loss. She liked that, helping others find strength in their numbers. But behind her composed demeanor and careful budgeting spreadsheets was a truth she hadn't fully admitted, even to herself. Her adult son, Colton, relied on her far more than he should. The shrill ring of her phone on the kitchen counter sliced through her quiet morning. Margaret glanced at the screen. Colton. A familiar ache settled behind her sternum. Not fear, not annoyance, but that creeping anxiety she'd long associated with her son's voice. She answered, her tone steady. "Good morning, sweetheart." "Hey, Mom," Colton replied, his tone too chipper for 8:23 a.m. "Listen, I hope I didn't catch you at a bad time." Margaret smiled faintly. "I'm just having my coffee. What's going on?" A pause. Then the sigh, soft, performative. "Well, it's Lila's school. They raised the tuition again, out of nowhere. Almost $2,000 more this semester. It's insane, Mom." Margaret frowned. "Didn't they already raise it last spring?" "Exactly. That's what I told them. But you know private schools. Just slap a new label on some computer program and charge you double. It's ridiculous." She stirred her coffee slowly. "How much is it now?" $12,000 for the semester, he said, with the practiced tone of someone who had rehearsed the number. "We're scrambling. Jenna had to cover some stuff for work, and my last event didn't close as expected." Of course it didn't. She kept the thought to herself. "I understand," she said gently. "I'll take care of it." "You're the best, Mom, seriously." He didn't ask if it was okay. He didn't offer to pay her back. He never did. "Can you send it today?" he asked, more casually than she liked. Margaret hesitated just long enough for silence to form. "Yes, I'll do it this afternoon." "Awesome. Oh, and you're coming to Thanksgiving next week, right? We're doing it at the house. Jenna says, don't bring anything. We've got it covered. Just bring yourself." The call ended with a rushed "love you," but the words carried no warmth, no weight. Margaret lowered the phone and stared out her kitchen window. The dogwood in the yard had turned deep red, the last stubborn leaves clinging to branches. Autumn used to mean family. Home-cooked meals, Raymond humming as he basted the turkey, Colton setting the table with clumsy enthusiasm. Raymond had been the gravity of their family, the quiet compass. When he passed 15 years ago, a sudden heart attack at just 55, the axis tilted. Colton had just graduated. Margaret thought, hoped, prayed that he'd step up, grow up. But instead, he unraveled. It had started small, a few $100s here, then help with a car payment, Then it became credit cards, business investments, school tuition, new emergencies every few months. Colton's life was one long, polished excuse, and Margaret, alone and aching for connection, became his financial oxygen. She told herself she was holding the family together, that this was what Raymond would have done, what he would have wanted. But deep down, even as she pulled up her bank's mobile app, even as she wired the money with practiced ease, a part of her knew she wasn't helping Colton. She was enabling him. Still, when the transaction confirmed with a cheerful chime, Margaret didn't hesitate. She closed the app, set her coffee cup down, and turned to the worn photograph hanging beside the fridge. Her wedding day. Raymond in a gray linen suit, smiling so hard his eyes disappeared. Margaret in lace and pearls clinging to his arm. "Still trying to hold it all together, Ray," she whispered. But even as she said it, her voice caught. And for the first time in years, she wondered if holding on was doing more harm than letting go. Margaret pulled into the cul-de-sac and parked her modest sedan in front of her son's pristine two-story home. The stucco exterior gleamed, the hedges were immaculately trimmed, and two imported cars, one of them new, judging by the dealership tag still hanging from the rear-view mirror, sat comfortably in the driveway. She stepped out with a covered pie dish in her hands, her heels crunching the gravel. The last of the afternoon sun gilded the expensive slate tiles on the roof, and Margaret paused for a moment, staring. She remembered the starter home Colton and Jenna used to live in. Half the size, half the pride. Now, luxury seemed to drip from every corner. The door opened before she knocked. "Grandma!" Lila's voice sang out like birdsong. Margaret's face softened. "There's my favorite poet." Lila wrapped her arms around her grandmother, nearly knocking the pie out of her hands. "Come see what I wrote for school," the 11-year-old said, grabbing Margaret's hand and tugging her toward the living room. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and something artificial. Store-bought candles masking what Margaret guessed was a lack of real cooking. Expensive furniture filled the space. A glass bar cart gleamed in the corner. On Colton's wrist, as he waved from the kitchen, was a gold watch she couldn't help but notice. A Rolex. Her stomach tightened. "Hey, Mom," he called. "Didn't expect you until later." Margaret raised an eyebrow but kept her tone light. "Traffic was better than I thought." Lila practically dragged her to the dining table where a folder of schoolwork lay open. "This is a poem I wrote for English class. We had to write about someone we admire." Margaret adjusted her glasses. Lila's neat handwriting stretched across the page. Her hugs are soft. Her words are kind. She knows the answer every time. She bakes, she teaches, she makes things right. "My grandma is my guiding light." Beneath it, a crayon drawing. A gray-haired woman with angel wings and a little girl holding her hand. Margaret blinked quickly, pretending to focus on a smudge on her glasses. "It's beautiful," she said softly, pulling Lila into a hug. "You made me look like an angel." "You are," Lila said simply. Margaret kissed her forehead. It was moments like these that made the rest bearable. The stress, the manipulation, the unspoken weight of being Colton's permanent safety net. She set the pie down in the kitchen and moved toward the hallway where Jenna's home office was. She'd left her sweater there during her last visit and went to retrieve it. That's when she saw the folder. It sat open on the desk, half covered by an Elle Decor magazine. Her name on the top page caught her eye. Not just her name, but her signature. Frowning, Margaret stepped closer. It was a loan agreement. More specifically, a credit guarantee, naming her as a guarantor for a substantial line of credit taken out under Colton's company. She read the fine print, heart thudding. It was dated 6 months ago. The signature was hers. The notary stamp was real, but she didn't remember signing this. Her hand shook as she picked up the document. It must have been mixed in with other papers he'd brought by. He often asked her to review business stuff, always in a rush, always insisting it was minor. She thought they were forms for his accountant or innocuous NDA clauses. Not this. Colton had legally bound her to repay over $100,000 if his business defaulted, and he never even told her. A sick feeling washed over her, a mix of betrayal and self-recrimination. How many times had she said yes without looking, trusting blindly? A burst of laughter rang from the living room. She stepped out quietly and leaned against the wall just before the entryway. From where she stood, she could see everyone. Colton holding court with a few friends, Jenna scrolling on her phone, wine in hand. Lila was showing her poem to someone else now. No one noticed Margaret. No one called her name. The Rolex glinted on her son's wrist again as he lifted his drink. She was there, in the house her money helped sustain, in the lives she held together like invisible thread. But she had become furniture, a utility, a name to sign. Margaret clutched the folder to her chest. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, surrounded by laughter that didn't include her, in a living room where not one person remembered she was standing there. And in that silence, a crack formed in the walls she'd built around her heart. The morning of Thanksgiving was unusually warm for late November in Savannah. Margaret stood in her modest kitchen, wrapping up a pumpkin pie and marshmallow-topped sweet potatoes. She had offered to bring the turkey, like she always had, but Jenna's text had come back curt. "No need, we're having it catered this year. Just bring yourself. Just bring yourself." That phrase lingered in her mind like smoke. 35 Thanksgivings she had hosted or helped prepare. Every recipe had her handwriting, every tradition tied to her memory. But this year, she had been reduced to a guest of honor no one remembered to honor. She arrived at Colton's home with a careful smile. The house was buzzing. Expensive music speakers hummed jazz, scented candles blazed in every corner, and professionally plated appetizers sat untouched on glossy trays. Jenna greeted her with air kisses and an almost apologetic, "We're doing things a bit different this year. You know how it is with the new crowd." Margaret nodded, her dish placed off to the side like an afterthought. She looked around and realized she didn't recognize most of the guests. Young, well-dressed couples laughing too loudly, sipping expensive wine, and dropping names of people Margaret had never heard of. It wasn't a family gathering. It was a social ladder, and she was somewhere near the foot of it. "Mom, you made it," Colton said, walking over with a half-full glass of bourbon. He looked sharp, tailored blazer, loafers without socks, and that damned Rolex catching the chandelier light with every hand movement. "Wouldn't miss it," she said softly, reaching up to pat his arm. He didn't hug her. As the meal began, Margaret was seated at the far end of the elongated dining table. On one side sat Lila, already bored with the adults, and on the other, a couple she vaguely remembered meeting once at a fundraiser. The table itself was lavish, fine china, gold-accented cutlery, and a centerpiece of candles and eucalyptus that made conversation difficult across the table. Margaret noticed how her sweet potatoes had been plated in small ramekins, separated from the rest as if they didn't belong. From her corner, she watched Colton entertain. He poured drinks, told stories, played the charming entrepreneur. Everyone seemed eager to be near him, to toast to his latest win. She could barely hear the specifics, but phrases floated down the table like confetti. "Finalizing the boat deal next week. Mexico over Christmas, it's going to be insane. Colton's vision is ahead of the curve." Margaret blinked. "Boat deal?" She leaned closer, trying not to appear obvious. A guest, a middle-aged man with slicked hair and an overly bright smile, raised his glass. "To Colton," he said, loud enough for the room to hush, "for finally pulling the trigger on that dream yacht. You earned it, man." A chorus of cheers followed. Lila clapped hesitantly. Margaret's mouth went dry. She turned to the woman next to her, who had introduced herself earlier as Justine, some kind of PR consultant. "Excuse me," Margaret said, trying to keep her voice light. "Did he say Colton bought a yacht?" Justine smiled, brushing hair off her shoulder. "Oh yeah, didn't you know? He said the down payment was sorted last week. Something about private investors coming through." Margaret's stomach dropped. Private investors. She sat back, hands clenched under the table. Her mind raced. Just days ago, Colton had pleaded for money, $12,000 for Lila's tuition. He'd made her feel selfish for hesitating. That had been only the latest in a string of emergencies. And now he was celebrating a luxury yacht purchase. "I'm sorry," Justine said, tilting her head. "You're the family friend, right? Or, are you the silent investor?" Colton said someone close to him made this all happen. The fork slipped from Margaret's hand. Excuse me," she muttered. She stood, brushing off her skirt, and walked slowly toward the hallway. Her heart pounded in her ears. She wasn't sure if it was rage, humiliation, or both, but something heavy had lodged itself in her chest. In the distance, laughter roared again. Glasses clinked. Champagne bottles popped. Colton was somewhere near the head of the table, glowing in praise. The golden boy. And she? She was the invisible spine of his success. Not honored, not thanked, just referenced vaguely as someone close. Justine's words echoed in her mind. "Are you the silent investor?" Margaret found herself by the coat closet, pressing her palm to the wall to steady herself. The voices behind her grew louder, brighter, but none of them were calling her name. The Thanksgiving dinner finally began to wind down. Plates were cleared, wine bottles emptied, and conversations shifted to evening plans. Margaret lingered at the table, hoping for a moment of acknowledgement, even a nod. But nothing came. Colton rose, stretching his arms with an exaggerated yawn. He motioned submissively toward a side table where cover plates sat cold, half-eaten portions of turkey, mashed potatoes, and sweet potatoes. He grabbed one, tucked it under his arm, and crossed over to Margaret. "This is for you, Mom," he said casually, sliding the plate into her hand. "Just enough. You don't have to cook anything anymore." His tone was offhand but cruelty bare. Margaret stared at the foil-wrapped meal. The words felt like a punch. "Thanks," she said, voice barely audible. He didn't look her in the eye. Instead, he turned back to his friends, laughing as though he had made a joke. Margaret's grip tightened around the plate, knuckles whitening. She didn't say a word. Tears sprang uninvited, hot and slow, tracing lines down her cheeks. No one asked if she was okay. No one offered a comforting hand. Festival lights winked in the dining room. Upbeat music pulsed from hidden speakers, and a mother at the end of the table was being served leftovers like a pantry pet. She swallowed hard. The tears blurred her vision, but Margaret forced herself to walk out politely through the living room, past the chattering group. She left through the front door into the crisp night air, the door clicking shut behind her in a way that sounded final. She didn't drive straight home. Instead, she sat in her car, engine idling, staring at the darkened facade of Colton's house. How many Thanksgivings had she spent here? Every seat she'd prepared, every dish she had perfected, and here she had nothing but leftover scraps. She tightened her cardigan around her shoulders and pressed down on the door lock. It felt like armor, but something inside felt broken. When Margaret finally pulled into her own driveway, it was close to midnight. She got out and made her slow way inside, placing the plate on the kitchen counter. She sat at the table with the foil crinkling under her shaking hands. Something snapped. She took her phone, logged into the banking app, transaction history. She scrolled. Deposit $12,000, transfer to Colton, timestamp 10:15 a.m. Deposit $15,000, transfer to business account, timestamp 11:02 a.m. Deposit $20,000, transfer to unnamed autopilot, timestamp 9:48 a.m. Each transfer had occurred within 24 hours. None to the school, none earmarked for tuition, none with memo lines stating for Lila. Instead, each money move went out fast and silent, straight into offshore accounts or shiny new purchases. There were no receipts, no requests for documentation, just cold, untraceable transfers draining her account. Margaret rested her forehead on the counter. She'd been careful, slicing costs here and there, saving for retirement, budgeting for volunteer work. But over the years, she had passively signed her life away, allowing Colton's life to be bankrolled by her dignity and resignation. The plate of food in front of her went untouched. She closed the app and met her own eyes in her reflection on the dark screen. That's when she made the decision. After 15 years of enabling, of feeding his comfort with her savings, of telling herself she was only supporting her family. This was it. Leaving the phone on the table, she stood deliberately and walked to her desk. There, she opened the file labeled Access Authorization, the one she'd never touched before. Then she logged into her financial accounts one by one and revoked Colton's trustee privileges, canceled every joint account, blocked all debit or credit cards associated with him, updated passwords and security questions across phone, email, and investment platforms. There was no thrill, no vengeance, just stark clarity and comfort in the knowledge that she was no longer at his financial mercy. Margaret paused, hand on the last security checkbox. She hesitated for a heartbeat, heart pounding with cold resolve, then clicked, Submit. It was done. She heard the phone beep with a low chime, a lock confirmation. She exhaled, feeling a decade of anxiety ebb away, replaced by something unfamiliar, but not unwelcome, empowerment. She went to bed, locking her bedroom door behind her. In the quiet darkness, Margaret lay awake, mind racing with thoughts. The yacht, the unexplained loan, the whispered congratulations around the table, the plate his hand had shoved into her lap, the knowledge that she had been everything, provider, caregiver, emotional shore, but nothing at all in moments that mattered. But now she had boundaries. Now she had a future that didn't depend on someone else's greed. As sleep finally crept in, she could almost hear her husband's voice, faint and steady. You deserve your own seat, not crumbs. Margaret drove to Clara's house mid-morning, accompanied by a restless tension in her chest. Clara, her closest friend since college, greeted her with a warm smile and a hug that lingered too long. You look tired, Clara said quietly as they settled in her sunlit living room, mismatched sofas cushioned with decades of conversation. Clara poured tea while Margaret fussed with the sleeve of her cardigan. It's complicated, Margaret began, voice low. She explained how Colton pressured her into signing contract after contract, all framed as minor paperwork for his business. Now she couldn't remember most of what she'd signed. Clara's expression hardened. You know he's using you, she said. You've been his safety net since Raymond died. It's time to wake up. Margaret nodded. I thought I was helping his startup, but it never felt right. Even last night when he handed me that plate, you remember the scene? I saw it in his eyes. I'm nothing more than an ATM, and it hurts. Clara squeezed her hand. Let's get some real answers. Meet me at the bank this afternoon. The two friends made their way to Clara's bank, a local branch where Clara had an account. Once through security, they sat at the customer lounge. Clara discreetly spokespersoned, and soon a bank officer guided Margaret to a private desk. They reviewed her account activity, regular transactions, mortgage, utilities, grocery stores, until a sudden spike. What's this? Margaret pointed to a series of entries. An account named Holloway Colton Investment Limited opened 3 years ago. She had never heard of it. I don't remember opening this, she admitted. The officer opened more pages. The account was jointly held in both their names. Funds regularly transferred in from her primary account, sometimes tens of thousands at a time, then offshored to an account in a Caribbean bank. Margaret's hands trembled. 3 years of siphoning, masked behind a legitimate-sounding name. But why didn't they tell me? She whispered. Did Colton open it without telling me? The officer shook her head. Joint account means both parties sign. Someone had to sign forms. Maybe it was presented as paperwork for his business. Clara's face was a storm of pity and anger. We need to get you legal advice. This is more than just tuition money, it's fraud. Margaret pressed her lips together. I signed the documents. I must have been too trusting, too eager to support him. Tears welled in her eyes. I can't believe I let this happen. All that money, gone. They left the bank with a file of documents. In the car, Clara rubbed her shoulder. I'll go with you to the lawyer. We'll sort it out. But this isn't your fault. You have to see this for what it is. Margaret looked out the window at familiar streets, the one she took to visit Colton's home, the one they walked for coffee, the park where she took Lila for picnics. So many Thanksgivings, she whispered. Clara nodded. Those good memories are still yours, and Lila's, but now you need new boundaries. That afternoon, Margaret returned home to face her computer. She opened her email and initiated contact with a law firm specializing in elder financial protection and fraud cases. An old photograph of Raymond and her on their honeymoon caught her eye on the shelf. She placed a hand on it. He would have noticed something was wrong. Her phone buzzed. It was the bank officer confirming her request for a full statement of the Holloway Colton account. Margaret exhaled. The truth was coming, and it hurt more than she expected. But clarity was a salve. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her mind replayed every helpful meeting with Colton, every pocket she'd opened, every blurred signature she'd scribbled. She wondered how many more hidden agreements waited to be discovered. Morning came gray and still. As she looked in the mirror, preparing coffee once again, she felt far older than her years. But she also felt something new, a spark of determination. She would fight to reclaim what was rightfully hers, and for the granddaughter who still believed her grandmother was an angel. Margaret took a deep breath and picked up the phone. The morning sunlight in Savannah filtered through the white shutters, casting soft beams across Margaret's sitting room. She cradled a steaming mug of tea and stared at the envelope on her lap, a crisp, cream-colored document emboldened with the words, Lila Holloway Education Trust. Opening it, Margaret felt a swell of resolve. She carefully read the terms. The funds could only be used for Lila's education, held in a locked account until her 18th birthday. No one, not Colton, not Jenna, could access a penny. The spreadsheet of scheduled deposits spread before her like a promise, monthly transfers designed to safeguard her granddaughter's future. It was her act of love, deliberate and defiant. She set the papers aside and opened her email to schedule an appointment at the bank. She'd been there twice in 2 days, but the urgency drove her back. Before leaving, she gently set Lila's poem on the coffee table, the one with angel wings drawn in crayon. A reminder of why she was doing this. At the branch, she was greeted by Marisol, her account manager, who gave her a knowing look. Everything progressing, Mrs. Holloway? Yes, she answered, trying to sound composed. And I need to ask you something delicate. Marisol's eyebrows rose. Of course. She led Margaret to a private office. Ma'am, she began quietly, I came into something by accident. Her gloved hand tapped a tablet on the desk. Your supplemental card. You use it for emergency purchases? Margaret swallowed. She had used it to wire money for tuition, groceries, occasional travels. There was a recent hold on it, about $30,000, for a lease on a condominium, the Grand at Pelham, Unit B12. Margaret's heart sank. Under my card? Marisol nodded. And the lessee's name was given as Jenna Holloway. The word echoed in Margaret's head. Her daughter-in-law. Quiet, polite, always gracious. Had used her card to secure a luxury condo unit at $2,500 a month? It didn't fit the narrative of a struggling young mother. How is that possible? Margaret whispered. Marisol's eyes were soft but firm. I don't know the backstory, but the cardholder agreement names you as liable. As long as that lease stands, charges will go to you. Margaret closed her eyes, breath caught in her throat. Betrayal was sharp and familiar, but this was layered. Later that evening, she rummaged through a small stack of old digital video files, footage from the belated last Thanksgiving dinner. She found it, the file labeled Nove Dinner 2019. With trembling hands, she pressed play. Lighting in the kitchen was bright, festive, her head bowed as she talked quietly with Jenna, who smiled and held a pen. On screen, Jenna said, "This is just a small form. They need signatures from both of you for the condo lease. It's separate from the house, but nice and close. I promise, it's temporary." Margaret glanced at the clipboard marked, "Condo application." Jenna implied a shared idea, maybe a backup home if the bank changed its mind, something benign. "And you're sure this isn't permanent?" she asked. "Not at all," Jenna replied breezily. "Just a precaution. You're the primary account holder. Colton and I need your name." Margaret hesitated, pen hovering. She trusted Jenna. After all, Jenna had always been sweet to her. As she signed, Jenna smiled warmly and hugged her on the cheek. The kind touch that had once comforted her now felt like perfume covering betrayal. Margaret blinked away tears as the video ended. She shut her laptop firmly and let the tears fall. "It wasn't just Colton," she whispered to the silent room. "It was you too, Jenna." Her chest felt hollow. She sank into the antique chair by the window, snowing tears upon the cushion. A mother duped, not just by her son, but by the daughter she'd welcomed into her heart. In the small, devastated hush, Margaret realized how deep the deception ran. Both of them had treated her like an enabler, a financial tool to deploy at their convenience. Her signature and generosity had been harvested as though they were her worth. She hugged herself tightly, as though anchoring her own spirit. Long minutes passed in fluttering sorrow before she lifted her head. Her tears had not washed everything away, but they had cleared her sight. Tomorrow, she thought, she'd write a letter. To Colton, to Jenna. She'd explain calmly. No threats, no melodrama, just clarity. Boundaries drawn in ink. Protection for Lila. And a mother's broken pride she refused to bury again. She looked at Lila's poem on the coffee table, the angel wings still bright in crayon strokes, and felt something hardening in her heart. Determination. She would not be invisible any longer. Margaret sat at her mahogany desk, quill in hand, carefully writing a letter addressed to Colton. The envelope before her was crisp, heavy stationery, without flourish or flourish, just the stark message. She had had enough. She wrote plainly, after years of unwavering support, she would no longer supply funds. Her home of 35 years would soon go on the market. She was removing Colton and Jenna from her will. Her intentions were clear, legal, irreversible, a message that this chapter of their relationship was closed. This finality felt surprising in its clarity. No anger, no recrimination, just decency and boundaries. She folded the letter and placed it atop a stack of items marked "for auction" on the adjacent table. Antique vase gifted by Raymond. That velvet armchair where he used to read the newspaper. The silverware their family had polished for holiday dinners. She was ready to let go of the past to claim her future. She made phone calls the next morning, first to the auction house, then to her estate lawyer. The will amendment was being drafted to revoke any inheritance rights for Colton and Jenna, designating Lila as the sole beneficiary of everything once she turned 18. She planned to trade the Savannah home for a smaller coastal cottage in Florida, where peace breezed in with the tides. It felt like rebirth. Later that day, as she packed boxes and organized donation bags, there was a timid knock at the door. Opening it, she saw Lila, her granddaughter, with a small backpack, her eyes shining but red-rimmed. "Grandma," the girl whispered, stepping inside and closing the door gently behind her. She carried a leather-bound journal. "This is yours," Lila said, placing it in Margaret's lap. Margaret opened the cover and began reading. Entries written by a child trying to make sense of the unspoken tensions at home. Lines like, "Mom said Grandma is selfish." And Dad said she's rich enough to pay for everything. Why is she crying all the time? And Grandma still brings us pie even though they say we don't need her anymore. Margaret's breath caught. The betrayal wasn't just financial. It was emotional. Her granddaughter had heard their unkind words, felt the cold dismissal, and yet still clung to love for her grandmother. Tears pricked at her eyes, but only Lila cried openly. Margaret gathered her granddaughter in her arms, wrapping her in a warm embrace. That night, they took refuge in Margaret's guest bedroom. The two lay side by side, illuminated by a single lamp that cast soft shadows against wallpaper floral and faded. The sounds of packing and distant traffic faded away. "Tell me the story again," Lila asked. Margaret nodded, smoothing her granddaughter's curls. She began to recount stories of Savannah summers with Raymond's fishing boat, the Thanksgiving turkeys her husband roasted, and the silly games of hide-and-seek they played when Colton was still in grade school. Twists of humor softened the sorrow. Margaret described the time they chased each other around the yard in rain boots after Katrina's deluge, laughing until her sides ached. She spoke of Raymond making prank calls to friends dressed as a pirate, using a parrot puppet. Lila giggled uncontrollably. That laughter felt like light. It contrasted sharply with the letters and documents she had stacked on her desk just hours earlier. It reminded Margaret of what mattered. Lila turned serious after a while. "Grandma, I don't want you to go." Her voice trembled. "I don't care where you live. I don't want to lose you." Margaret held her tightly. "Sweetheart, I could never lose you. That's why I'm doing this. I can't let people treat me so badly and teach you that it's okay. And Mom and Dad, they say I have to choose." Lila's voice cracked. "They say it's either them or you." Margaret felt pain deep enough to crack her composed exterior. She stroked Lila's hand. "You don't have to choose, love. People will say things when they're angry, but if they truly love you, they'll understand that boundaries don't mean betrayal." Lila sniffled, leaning close. Margaret whispered assurance. Few things would change their bond. "Even if I go far away," Margaret said, her voice soft, "you're still my guiding light." A hush settled between them. Two generations of women, one betrayed but steadfast, one torn but trusting, found solace in each other. Emotion moved in waves: sorrow, warmth, clarity, and hope. Margaret realized she had one more responsibility: to show Lila that strength could grow from heartbreak and that love can survive honesty. By midnight, they drifted to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms. The next morning, Margaret would send her letter. She would make her move, and she would start anew, stronger, light air, alive. But in that fragile night, she simply held her granddaughter, breathing in the weight of the past and the promise of tomorrow. The morning sun had barely lifted over the Savannah rooftops when the knock came, loud, insistent, angry. Margaret was in the kitchen, brewing coffee, while Lila quietly folded the blanket from their shared night on the couch. The knock came again, sharper this time, echoing through the quiet house like a warning shot. She walked calmly to the door and opened it. Colton stood on the porch, face flushed red, jaw clenched. He wasn't wearing his usual charm mask. Behind him, the sleek black SUV idled at the curb, and in the driver's seat, Jenna sat motionless, hands on the wheel, eyes avoiding the house. "What the hell is this?" Colton barked, waving a crumpled envelope in his hand. Her letter. Margaret didn't flinch. She'd expected this. "You read it, I assume," she said evenly. "You're cutting me off? After everything I've done for you?" he snapped. "You're leaving this house, your legacy, to a child?" Margaret's eyes were steady. "To the only one who sees me." His laugh was hollow. "This is insane. You don't get to just erase us." She took a breath, slow and deliberate. "I'm not erasing anyone. I'm reclaiming myself." Colton stepped closer, pointing a shaking finger. "You owe me. You raised me to believe you'd always be there. You built that expectation. You can't back out now." "I raised you to be kind," Margaret said softly, "not entitled." He glared at her, chest heaving. "Fine. If you walk away, don't expect to ever see Lila again." Margaret's spine straightened, her heart thrashing inside her rib cage. The cruel blow hit hard, but she remained still. "You'd use your own daughter as leverage?" she asked, voice quiet with disbelief. "She's my daughter," he hissed. "Not yours." Behind her, a small voice rang out. "That's not true." Colton turned, startled. Lila stood in the hallway, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes shimmering but fearless. She walked past her father and stood beside her grandmother. "You don't get to choose who I love," she said. "You can't make me forget her." "Lila, get in the car," he commanded, but his voice trembled now. She looked up at Margaret, then back at her father. "No, I'll find Grandma, wherever she goes. Even if you move us to the moon, I'll find her." Margaret knelt to Lila's level, pulling her into a tight embrace. "Sweetheart, you don't have to choose, but I'll always be here when you need me." "I know," Lila whispered. Colton stepped back as if struck. He looked again toward the SUV. Jenna remained seated, watching but unmoving. She didn't open the door. She didn't signal. She just sat there. Margaret rose to her feet. Her voice was calm, measured, but resolute. "I am not the victim of this family anymore, Colton. I'm not the wallet. I'm not the silent helper. I am your mother, but that does not entitle you to destroy me." He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time in her life, Margaret saw it clearly. He had no control now. Not over her, not over Lila. Only the crumbling illusion of power remained, and it was slipping. She took Lila's hand and stepped back into the house. Before she closed the door, she looked her son in the eye one last time. "You can scream, you can threaten, but the one thing you can't do anymore," her voice dropped to a whisper, "is use me." And then she shut the door. Inside, the silence was heavy. Margaret placed a hand over her heart, feeling it pound like a drum inside her chest. She had done it. She had faced him. And she had not broken. Lila stood nearby, eyes wide, still processing. "Was that okay?" the girl asked quietly. Margaret knelt again, brushing a strand of hair from Lila's face. "That was brave." They stood in the entryway for a long moment, arms wrapped tightly around each other. Outside, the SUV eventually pulled away. No more knocking, no more shouting, just the ticking clock and the quiet hum of a life about to change. Margaret looked around the house, the faded wallpaper, the scuffed banister, the hallway lined with framed memories. She loved this house once, deeply, but now it was just a shell, a place soaked in compromises and pain. She exhaled. The old life had been defined by fear, by obligation. The new one would begin with truth. Tears brimmed in her eyes, not from sorrow this time, but from release. Grief and freedom often come intertwined. As she walked Lila upstairs to rest, Margaret felt the echo of Colton's last threat still hanging in the air. But Lila's promise had been louder. "I'll find you, wherever you are." Hope, even at rock bottom, had a way of shining through the cracks. The breeze off Sarasota Bay was gentle, almost musical. Margaret stood barefoot on the back porch of her new cottage, the boards still fragrant with fresh paint and salt air. The cottage was modest, nothing like the grand home she had left behind, but it was hers, entirely and unapologetically. Its little white fence, its bougainvillea vines curling up the side, the view of the shimmering water just beyond the docks, all of it pulsed with freedom. Boxes sat unopened in the hallway. A pie dish she'd once brought to Colton's home now held lemons on the kitchen counter. She moved slowly, deliberately, savoring every decision. What drawer to use, which mug to drink from. Each choice was her own, unfiltered by anyone else's needs or manipulation. Then came the letter. It arrived in a thick white envelope, postmarked from a Savannah bank. The logo on the corner instantly triggered a pit in her stomach. She read it standing at the counter, her knuckles whitening with each line. A formal notice, an investigation, an unauthorized loan application filed under her name. Applicant, Margaret Holloway. Co-signed by Jenna Holloway. Purpose, real estate acquisition, secondary residence. Status, under review. Potential fraudulent signature. Her legs weakened. She sank into the nearest chair, the paper trembling in her hands. Not again. This time, it wasn't Colton. It was Jenna, the woman who had smiled politely at holidays, who baked cookies with Lila, and once called Margaret Mom without irony. She scanned further. The date of the application coincided with the day she signed what she thought was an insurance renewal at Jenna's request. No witnesses, no video footage this time, just forged trust. The letter advised her of options, one of which was to press charges for identity fraud. It also noted that if she failed to respond within 30 days, the liability might fall solely on her. Margaret stared at the ceiling, the fan spinning lazily above. Her thoughts raced. Legal action, police reports, courtrooms, and then Lila. The girl's name burned in her mind like a lighthouse in fog. What would it do to her to see her parents under investigation, to know that her mother had betrayed the one person still fighting for her future? Margaret set the paper down. Her shoulders were heavy with grief, but also something firmer. Resolve. She picked up a pen and walked to the small writing desk beside her bedroom window. A warm draft from the sea brushed her cheek as she began to write. Not to the bank, not to the police, but to Lila. Sweetheart, if this letter ever finds you, without my arms to wrap around you, know that it was written from love, not pain. Sometimes we don't get to fix what others broke, only how we carry the piece. She paused, blinking away tears. You are the best part of our family, Lila. You listened when others shouted, and you believed in me when I wasn't sure I still believed in myself. I don't know what your life will become, but I hope you never let anyone make you feel small for having a kind heart, especially not the people who owe you more. She tucked the letter into an envelope, along with a photograph of them on the porch swing back in Savannah, Lila's head tucked beneath her chin, both of them laughing over a shared piece of pie. She sealed it. That evening, Margaret sat on the porch, the bay glowing under the blush of sunset. A fishing boat puttered in the distance. Gulls called overhead. For the first time in years, her world felt still. The rage she might have once felt had dulled. It wasn't that she forgave Jenna, she hadn't, but she refused to become the bitterness they tried to plant in her. The next day, she would speak to a lawyer, quietly, cautiously. But for tonight, she would breathe. Her life wasn't perfect. Her heart still carried bruises, but she was finally living on her terms, and that meant more than revenge ever could. In the quiet warmth of Sarasota, Margaret's life began to bloom. Not in grand, sweeping gestures, but in quiet victories. Each morning, she walked along the bay with a tote bag filled with lesson plans and laminated worksheets. At the local community center, she hosted free classes for single mothers, teaching them how to budget, how to read bank statements, how to say no to financial abuse. Her small class grew quickly, first 4 women, then 12. Women of all backgrounds came with notebooks and silent burdens. Margaret guided them with a calm confidence that hadn't always belonged to her. She shared her own story without names, letting them hear in her voice the years of silence she'd survived and the strength she'd rebuilt from ash. One afternoon, while cleaning up after a session, her phone buzzed unexpectedly. It was a video call request from an unknown number. Margaret hesitated, then accepted. The screen flickered before revealing Lila's tear-streaked face. "Grandma?" the girl whispered. Margaret's breath caught. "Lila? Honey, where are you?" "I'm at school. I borrowed Tessa's phone. Please don't tell," Lila said quickly, glancing over her shoulder. "Dad took mine. Said I'm not allowed to call you anymore." Margaret's heart clenched. "It's okay, sweetheart. I'm here." Lila wiped her face, trying to smile. Mom said I could trust you. That you're the only one I should believe right now." That confession hit like lightning. Margaret gripped the edge of the table. She said she's sorry. She didn't stop Dad because she was scared, but she said she sees it now, what he's been doing. Margaret blinked back tears. "I miss you so much." "I miss you too." Lila glanced around again. "When can I see you?" Margaret didn't have an answer. Instead, she smiled softly. "Soon, I promise." "I have to go," Lila whispered. "But I love you, Grandma. I never stopped." The screen went dark. Margaret sat frozen, the empty room echoing with silence. She placed the phone down, pressed her hands to her face, and sobbed, not from grief, but from the fierce, overwhelming wave of love and hope that had broken through her isolation. That night, Clara showed up unannounced with a bottle of wine and a stack of printouts. "You need to see this," she said, sliding the pages across the table. Margaret wiped her eyes, confused. "What is it?" "Colton's company. It's gone under." Margaret scanned the headlines. Holloway Capital collapses amid allegations of mismanagement. Luxury yacht repossessed. CEO Colton Holloway silent on massive debt lawsuits. Clara poured 2 glasses, raised hers. "He sold the Rolex, too." Margaret stared at the photo. Colton walking hurriedly outside a courthouse, face pale, tie loosened. She didn't gloat. She didn't laugh. Instead, she let the silence stretch, heavy and necessary. "I didn't want this," she said softly. Clara nodded. "I know. But it feels fair," Margaret added, surprised by the calm in her voice. "I warned him. I gave him years. He thought I'd always catch him." Clara leaned back. "You finally let him fall." The 2 women sat together long into the night, sipping wine as the waves lapped gently outside. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was truth, and truth finally was enough. Margaret felt it in her bones. She was no longer the mother whose silence enabled. She was the woman who rebuilt, who taught others how to protect their worth, who showed her granddaughter that love does not mean surrender. And as she tucked away the letter from the bank, the video call from Lila still echoing in her ears, she knew this for certain. She hadn't lost her family. She'd simply redefined it. 6 months passed quietly in Sarasota. The cottage had settled into itself, like a woman who had finally found the right dress. Comfortable, light, unapologetically hers. Margaret tended to her garden in the mornings, taught her classes in the afternoons, and in the evenings she wrote letters, some to Lila, others to herself, marking milestones of a life rebuilt. Then, one Thursday morning, she opened her mailbox and froze. A cream envelope, no return address. The handwriting was neat, familiar. Inside was a letter, handwritten, from Jenna. "Dear Margaret, I owe you more than an apology, but it's where I have to start. I watched you suffer in silence, and I said nothing. I excused Colton's behavior for years, out of fear, out of comfort, out of my own cowardice. But I see now how much damage that silence caused. To you, to Lila, to myself. I'm filing for divorce. I've submitted a formal complaint documenting years of financial abuse, manipulation, and psychological control. I'm taking Lila with me. And when summer arrives, she'll be on a plane to see you. Because you're not just her grandmother, you're her safe place. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it, but I hope it's not too late. Jenna." Margaret sat on her porch swing, the letter trembling in her hands. Waves lapped against the shore in the distance, slow and soothing. The wind carried salt and hibiscus and something deeper, relief. She read the letter again, this time slowly, allowing the words to land. Divorce. Formal complaint. Lila will be on a plane to see you. She folded the letter with reverence and placed it in the drawer beside Lila's poem. The line, "You're her safe place," echoed in her mind like a benediction. 3 weeks later, Margaret stood at the arrivals gate of Sarasota Bradenton Airport, heart fluttering like a teenager waiting for her first love. The terminal doors opened and there she was, Lila, with a rolling suitcase and that unmistakable spark in her eyes. They saw each other at the same moment. Lila dropped her bag and ran, arms outstretched, crashing into her grandmother with a force that knocked breath from Margaret's lungs, but in the best possible way. "Grandma!" she cried, burying her face into Margaret's shoulder. Margaret held her tight. "I missed you so much." "I missed you more," Lila whispered. They drove home in quiet joy, the windows down, Lila's hair whipping in the wind. The moment they stepped inside, Lila gasped. "It's so peaceful," she said, spinning slowly. "It smells like the ocean and pie." Margaret laughed. "That's pretty much my brand now." They spent the day walking the beach, collecting shells and telling stories. That night, under soft lamplight, they curled up on the porch swing, Lila resting her head on Margaret's lap. "Mom says Dad's not doing well," Lila said. "He's angry all the time, blames everyone." Margaret nodded. "That sounds like him." Lila looked up. "Do you hate him?" The question came soft, but it pierced. Margaret paused, brushing a strand of hair behind her granddaughter's ear. "No, honey, I don't hate him. But I don't trust him either. There's a difference." "Will you ever forgive him?" Margaret's eyes searched the stars. "Forgiveness is complicated. I don't hold hate in my heart, but I carry the lesson. I remember what it cost me." Lila was quiet. "Sometimes," Margaret continued, "forgiveness doesn't mean letting someone back in. It just means letting yourself move forward." The girl nodded slowly. "I think I understand." Margaret smiled. "That's all I can hope for." They sat there in the hush of summer night, two survivors from different generations, bound not just by blood, but by truth, and the quiet bravery it takes to break a cycle. The sky over Sarasota burned with orange and gold as the sun lowered into the Gulf. Margaret and Lila sat on a woven blanket spread across the sand, bare feet buried in the warm grains, the hush of gentle waves lapping at their toes. The air smelled of salt and sunscreen, but also of something deeper. Truth finally ready to be shared. Lila's head rested on Margaret's shoulder. For a long time, neither of them spoke. "Grandma," Lila finally whispered, "can you tell me everything?" Margaret looked at her. "Everything?" Lila nodded. "Not what Dad said, not what Mom was too scared to explain. I want to know from you." Margaret inhaled deeply. She looked out over the water where the horizon bled into sky and began. She told her granddaughter about the early years, when Colton was a sweet boy with big dreams and no discipline, about how Raymond's sudden death shattered their family's balance, about how grief made her vulnerable, made her generous in all the wrong ways. She described the years of silent withdrawals, the contracts slipped into family dinners, the sweet manipulation layered in guilt and false gratitude. She spoke not with bitterness, but with honesty. "He didn't start out cruel, them deceit them," Margaret said. "But when you love someone too much without asking anything in return, they stop seeing you as a person." Lila held her hand tightly. Margaret continued. She told her about the loan Jenna forged, the condo signed in her name. The moment she realized she had given away not just her money, but her identity, and she described how it all came crashing down, with a leftover dinner plate on her lap, served by a son who couldn't see her anymore. Lila listened in silence. A single tear rolled down her cheek. "I'm sorry they hurt you," she whispered. Margaret smiled gently. "It's not your burden to carry, but I wanted you to know the truth, not to turn you against them, but so you could see how strong you are when you stand for something." Lila nodded. "I want to be like you." Margaret chuckled softly. "A little less drama wouldn't hurt." They both laughed. The sun had nearly vanished, a warm pink glow painting the sand. Margaret reached into her pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I've been waiting for the right time," she said. Lila looked up, eyes wide. Margaret opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring with a single sapphire, surrounded by a halo of tiny diamonds. The stone shimmered like the sea itself. "This was my engagement ring," Margaret said. "Your grandfather gave it to me after his first paycheck as a teacher. It's not flashy, but it meant everything. We built a life from this promise." She slipped the ring into Lila's hand. "When you're older," she said softly, "I want you to give this to someone. But not just anyone. Give it to someone who sees you. All of you. Someone who never makes you feel small." Lila clutched the ring, nodding slowly. "Someone who knows how to love without conditions," Margaret added. The girl threw her arms around her grandmother, burying her face into her chest. Margaret held her close, the ring still warm between them. They sat like that until the stars appeared, the tide inching closer with every breath. And in that moment, beneath a sky full of memory, forgiveness, and hope, Margaret no longer felt like someone who had been discarded. She felt like a root, A beginning. A woman once forgotten. Now the cornerstone of a legacy. The camera of the universe panned wide. Two silhouettes against a fading sky, hands interlocked, the sea behind them endless and forgiving. The past could not be undone. But the future? It had just begun.